Kathy, it's lovely to be sitting here with you. And we're going to be broaching a tricky topic, the topic of fiscal inequality that can emerge as a family grows and develops. And it comes in many, many forms within families, as you know. And I think what we want to do this afternoon is perhaps focus on fiscal inequality in intimate relationships. I know this is something that's really interesting to you. What is it about this that particularly intrigues you?
I think the thing that has caught my interest is both history and two clients. And all the history that you read about Barbara Hutton and Vanderbilt and the Onassis, I can't remember her name, Christina Onassis, looks at women who have a great deal of wealth marrying and the perils of that. Well, I certainly don't have clients with that kind of resources. But what I am noticing is that there is a great deal of concern, interest, and energy about that topic. Women especially, which is an interesting thing, who are marrying men with lesser financial means. So it caught my interest. And then I had a client, a father who had daughters, who had made his wealth in this generation. And he was very concerned about son-in-laws and doing beyond what others do. He had seen the problems. He said, I was at a golf tournament and the people I were playing golf with were talking about their son-in-laws in such disparaging ways. And he said, I can see this has much more to do with the inequality of resources than with the personality of the young man. So that caught my interest. And then I had a woman whose father, she's one of 5 siblings, left her money outright, and how she's tried to work it around with her husband so that they're on more equal footing. And I was just intrigued with it. So that's where it came from. And this is often what happens in my practice. Something will come up, I'll read an article, and then a client will say, you know, I've been thinking about this, Kathy. What do you think about it? And then I start thinking about it. So that's what got me to it.
So essentially what you're talking about then is women that have more economic resources than their partner, which is not the traditional model that we, in years gone by, that we've been accustomed to. So what have you learned that would be helpful for people to know in navigating this idea that a woman has more resources than her husband or her intimate partner?
So let me throw a couple ideas out to you. I have not formalized my thinking on this completely, but I've got enough traction to get people thinking, and I would be interested in what other people think. One is that, well, first of all, the only paper that I could find was written by Jay Hughes and Joni Bronfman and Jackie Merrill. And it was written 17 years ago. That's the only paper, and it's titled Fiscal Inequalities. Wow. That's unusual in and of itself. There's information about women who earn more than their husbands, and what happens. There's research subsequently to that, and the kind of problems that are created when women are earning more money when their husbands are working, not when their husbands are at home. So there's not very much information. So I talked to people, and what I think is that most people think of it as a dyad, a husband and a wife, and they've got a problem. She's got more money than he does. But it's much more a family systems problem, and it's much more a family dynamic problem than these two people where you would see it as isolated. So when people get married, at least in my day, you got a dress, you plan the wedding, you got china, you got linens, you got all that kind of stuff. But nobody talked about things like money, the use of money, how it's shared. And this client of mine did a very good job. In fact, I've asked her to help somebody that I'm working with in bringing to the table and to her father and mother with her soon-to-be husband, how are we going to approach this? This is not what society expects. They expect the man to make more money. How are we as a family going to do it? And she started out meeting with her father alone, asking him, did he have any bias about this? The ability to take it back to the family, to take it back as a public discussion, and then to include, was the difference, I think, in changing the conversation. And what she did was suggested that her siblings also do the same. It was the father and his wife who had made the money, and was sizable. And by talking to the father and the mother about it and their biases, it really, I think, went to the fact that we've got a situation, there's inequality here, but if you think about it, there's inequality in every marriage, in one way or another. And what do you do if you're smart or if you're planful? Is you talk about it. And you think about, what are you going to do? What are we going to do when we have this money and we want this size house and the husband feels it's not big enough? Or how do you approach this? And she's come up with some really interesting questions to start the conversation, first with the father, and then with her mother and father together, and then with her siblings. So what becomes kind of hidden away, he's marrying all this money, becomes an open conversation. And the question of, how do we take care of your family, her husband's family? The question of, when you have such discrepancy in wealth and there's needs on the husband's family, the ability to talk about it with her father and mother seems to open up the conversation in a way that allows people to know what they think and know what they believe. So that's my beginning thinking of it. But it's an interesting dynamic. And I've seen people mostly not handle it well because of what money represents in our society. I'm going to take a breath, and then you do.
And what I've noticed is, I think that there's fear on both sides. So the family that have more economic resources, there's fear that the person that's coming in has the wrong motives. But for the young person that's marrying into the big family of wealth, that usually comes with a lot of complexity that they've not approached before. Family meetings, family retreats, family assemblies, family office. A lot of people don't know what those concepts are. So how do we help onboard spouses? I mean, you've talked about dialogue and communication in advance of the wedding, but once they're in the family, how do we help onboard them so that they feel comfortable in their new marriage?
Great question. This young woman decided that choice was very important. And so she asked her father and her husband, her soon-to-be husband, would they like to go together to their estates and trust lawyer? Would he like to understand what she would inherit and what her responsibility? But she wanted to go with the father and her soon-to-be husband to talk about it. But she said, would you like to know about this? We'd like to share this with you. And would you like to attend? They had very regular family meetings because they were investing, they were co-investing. And would you like to know about this? Would you like to come to the family meetings? Would you like to serve? And at first he said, I don't want any part of it. I'm not marrying you for your money. I've got my own way in the world. And after they were married, he came back and said, I need to know what you're thinking about, what's driving these decisions. And so he came back very gradually and eventually ended up on the one of the investment committees. But it was the family gave him the choice of information and attendance. And the ability to give people a choice makes all the difference. Rather than saying, you've got to show up at these family meetings, we're not going to tell you where we are. So it became evolutionary rather than a mandated kind of thing. And I think that made a big difference.
Now, it sounds like in this example that there was a lot of openness and transparency, but I can think of examples where there's fear and protectionism. They don't want to disclose personal financial information to an incoming new family member for fear that if the marriage dissolves, they'll have too much information. Have you come across that? Do you have any thoughts around how to help with that?
I have, and what I say to people that I work with, you are where you are now. and you have fear, and often it's based in the multi-generational family. So an understanding of both families multi-generationally is critically important. And understanding what it is, how your thinking has been influenced. So talking about that is really important. But I say to people when I work with them, I am always striving for inclusiveness and openness. That is what the long-term goal is. You start from where you are now, and you work toward more and more openness.
Why do you advocate that?
I believe, and I think this is from my generation, that you can deal with anything if you can put it out there and think together about it, especially things where they're joint. And that the embarrassment in time, over time, can make a difference in being more open to things. However, people are where they are, and they have some barriers, and I respect that. So I start with that, always moving and moving and moving. And I remember one family meeting we had with 4 very competent next gen, and the wife said there was a family meeting where they were disclosing their assets, and the adult children didn't know it. They had lived very modestly, and the parents were very concerned. And the wife said, "We are not having the in-laws. Absolutely not. This is too much information. We need to deal with it." It made sense to me. At the end of the meeting, she said, "We have to have them in.
They're the parents.
We have to. We are, we are, as a family, we will solve the problems that come up with being informationally open as they come up. We can handle those problems." So I think I thought she was right. At the beginning, she needed to figure out in her own head the sequence of that. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with people for 2 years who, after 2 years, finally say, "All right, okay, I'm ready now." So right. I think that
they have to build a level of comfort.
Right,
with the process.
and it is that takes so much time in working with families. It's not a quick communication seminar that'll do it.
No, I'm thinking some good skills building around difficult conversations is needed. And now, Kathy, is it any different? I mean, we've talked a little bit about the woman being economically better off than the male in the relationship, but does it make any difference the other way? If the man has more financial resources, I know that's the more traditional model. Have you seen it be fundamentally different, or your strategies be the same?
I'm embarrassed. Oh, my strategy is always the same.
Communication.
If there's that kind of or exposure and research into the 2 families you come from, that's really, I think that's important on both sides. I wish that it weren't so skewed with a man marrying a wealthier woman. But that's why I'm saying I'm just in the beginning of thinking this through.
Right.
What I see is that is more discordant than women marrying wealthy men, except if there's a huge age discrepancy. If you've got a 22-year-old marrying a 65-year-old, which it's
often, another dynamic.
Yeah,
it's a generational dynamic.
But often I've been trying to go back in the literature about science and about where that would have its foundational roots, but there is something about a man providing well for his family, and when the wife and her father, which is the way it usually, or wife and the mother provide the basis for the husband, something seems to come out of balance. And I have seen now 2 people who have addressed it really well, but it took time and planning to do it. And I must say, this one client had the real foresight. He said, "I don't want to talk badly about my sons-in-law. This is a fact. We have more resources. He has additional resources." And there was also, the father was very instrumental in helping them talk about what kind of support could be provided for the husband's family if there was an emergency or education or something like that. So he was quite, advanced, I'd say, in thinking about it.
It is quite stunning that there's so little on this.
Isn't it?
Given that we're also being told the monumental transition of wealth that's going to be occurring. So a lot of young people are going to be inheriting large sums of money, and yet we're not having the conversations around what that is going to do to their relationships. What would your advice be to young people who are struggling with this? Where could they go for help? Who could they contact? What can they read? Because it's a big topic.
I'm going to encourage my client colleague, who is an inheritor, a female inheritor with 3 sisters and 2 brothers, to write about and put down how she approached it with her father. So that could be one. It's in the early stages, and I would encourage anybody who's interested to please contact me. I'd be interested in how do you think about it, so to be a resource. I do know that in all the research, people want to talk about these things. They think it's extremely important in all the surveys, but it just sticks in their throat. How do you gather people? How do you talk about it? And it's an iterative process. So you talk about it, then you ask more questions, and you continue to talk about it. Just that process, I think, allows the son or the son-in-law in these cases to come in with a different set of a different position, a more open position, especially when it's talked about honestly over a period of time. But it does take courage. But I think the payoff I've seen is that then people can talk to each other genuinely without this kind of false thing about that guy's marrying my daughter for her money, which is often what's talked about.
Exactly.
Correct.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy. That's been fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
You're welcome.